Welcome everybody to the April Research Matters. I hope you are all having a wonderful month. Excited to turn it over to Eriko to give us a quick update on CT.gov. Eriko?
Thanks, Josh. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Eriko. I work in Regulatory Support Office with Resija Nambia to provide clinicaltrial.gov support to research community. So I want to give a quick recap from previous talk in Research Matters. So in January, I talked about what CT.gov is. So CT.gov is the largest clinical trial registry and result database run by NIH, where investigators can disclose key information of their clinical trial. So today I just want to give you a different perspective. So this morning when I checked the public website, there has been over 5,000 COVID-related clinical trial registered on CT.gov. So it was about 2,500 last year around this time. So it has been double in 1 year. So CT.gov is a free to register and free to access all of these like 370,000 records. And CT.gov is a rich resource for investigator as it allows prior access to clinical trial results before journal publication. So you can use this website to recruit subjects and give a unique opportunity to do a secondary analysis because results of these trials are available. So you can do meta-analysis, meta-regression using data that are available in the public website. Then I talk about why do we have to do the CT.gov reporting. And then again, many agencies and organizations are requiring CT.gov reporting. And last Research Matter, I talked about which studies needs to be registered. And I went over the flowchart, which helps you to determine whether CT.gov reporting is required or not for your study. So this month, I want to review the timeline for CT.gov registration updates and results reporting. So first, registration. So as you can see, most of the agencies are requiring trial registration on CT.gov within 21 days of first participant's enrollment. So the critical distinction is that for publication in the ICMJ e-journals, the trial needs to be registered before enrollment of the first participants. Otherwise, investigator cannot publish in the journal. So we actually have received several emails from UT Southwestern investigators asking why their manuscript were rejected. Even they were following timeline, which is 21 days of enrollment per federal regulation and NIH policy, and PI even did the results posting on time. That's because they did not register the trial before the first participant's enrollment. Their manuscript was actually rejected. So it did not go to peer review. So this is the email investigator received from the editor at New England Journal of Medicine in response to a manuscript submission. So this is true tragedy for PI who spent years to receive the grant and years to complete the trial and not being able to publish their important life work on some of the best journal. So we definitely do not want this to happen to our investigators. So this is something PI needs to be made aware of if they have not already. So for this reason, at UT Southwestern, CT.gov trials must be registered at the time of EIRB study submission. We want to ensure that registration is done prior to participants' enrollment. So now the timeline for results reporting. So results posting must be done within 12 months of primary completion date. So again, so primary completion date is the date of the last study visit where data was collected for the primary outcome. So that's when 12 months clock starts for the deadline to do the results posting. So whatever day it is, your results are due within 1 year from that day. So primary completion date is your time clock. So as soon as you finish collecting data for primary outcome from the last subject, you need to remember to log into ct.gov and then provide actual primary completion date and mark your calendar and give yourself enough time to work on the results reporting. Remember, as I mentioned previously, results reporting may take up to 50 hours. So here's the consequences and penalties for late registration and or results posting. Again, this includes the financial civil penalty. As I mentioned previously, FDA started imposing penalty this year. So many institutions start receiving pre-notice letters. So another big one is NIH. So not only PI loses NIH funding, per NIH director, Dr. Collin, notice of their grant awards on clinical trial will be held up if previously funded record have issued or they have not registered. So NIH is now checking the ct.gov record for the previously funded trial. So if you or your PI have outstanding trial with major issue comments or trial is flagged in the system, and then you probably already have heard from us already, but I suggest PI to get on it immediately and contact our office for a question immediately. And just be aware that when you are submitting your NIH grants, NIH does allow up to 2,000 direct cost for clinical trials reporting efforts. So it is allowable expense and also actually makes your grants more competitive rather than opposite, because NIH can see that you are working hard to stay in compliant with federal regulations. And consequences at UT Southwestern includes SPOT will be holding coverage analysis finalization, and HRPP will be holding ERB study activation, as mentioned previously. So now timeline for the updates. So just like EIRB, registration of the trial is not the end of the story for the investigators. So ct.gov registry requires annual update, just like CR, just like continuing review. And when protocol amendments are being made, so just like modification, investigators have to update the record in ct.gov as well. And these are the timeline for specific data elements within the ct.gov. So, ct.gov is definitely not, set and forget kind of thing. So this slide will help you and your PI to understand the timing of the ct.gov reporting responsibility. So this shows the EIRB and ct.gov clinical trial timeline from the perspective of the study team and investigator. So I want to emphasize that both are almost exactly in parallel. So you submit, register the study, but just using the different systems. So investigator would submit modification, update the ct.gov record, do the continuing review in EIRB, and do the annual update in the ct.gov. So only difference between EIRB and ct.gov really is that investigator must submit results in ct.gov if it is required. So operationally speaking, this means that every time you do CR modification or even submit the notice of study closure in EIRB, that can trigger your corresponding actions in ct.gov. So this slide summarizes important dates that I just covered so far. So you want to remember to mark your calendar for those dates. So one last important date that I want all of you to be aware of is correction expected date for PRS major comments. So which is basically response due date for CT.gov reviewers stipulations regarding your record, regarding your submission. So when record has some problem, record owner and person who worked on the record worked on the record will be receiving email from CT.gov. So don't ignore those email. Make sure to log in to CT.gov record and click this review comments button. So when you receive stipulation, it will flag your record like this image, and it tells you the correction expected date. So you have 15 calendar days to address major stipulation for registration related record and 25 calendar days for results posting. So it is calendar day, so it includes Saturday and Sunday, and then these dates are set by CT.gov, so not by me. And this is per regulation for applicable clinical trial. So you want to put those due date on your calendars as well. So lastly, so let's quickly review metrics. So according to VEDA non-compliance trial tracker website, UT Southwestern as a whole, our compliance rate proportion was 68.2% in last May. UT Southwestern leadership was obviously very concerned at that time. And with everyone's effort, we made 100% compliance since this year, January. And in March, we were able to keep 100% compliance. So important to note that this 100% compliance is for FDA-regulated applicable clinical trial results only. So it does not include NIH-funded trials that are not applicable clinical trial or trials that are voluntary register. So we created internal metrics. So this shows overall real-time compliance for all UT Southwestern records. So I'm not including, so we manage parkrun records too. So I have not included parkrun records on this data yet. I will. So the blue histogram is the total number of trial that is registered under UT Southwestern account. So green is the number of record with no problem. So whatever the difference between blue and greens are orange and red bars, so those are considered problem records. So orange one is the problem record that are not FDA regulated trial, but has been flagged in the system with some sort of errors, which must be corrected. And the red one is the FDA regulated trial that is subject to federal monetary fines. And so we are down to one trial, and these results are actually currently under CT.gov review. So our goal is this orange and red one to be as low as we can and continue with 100% compliant in non-compliance tracker website. So please note that UT Southwestern leaderships are periodically reviewing this website and non-compliance list, which lists name of the PI. So here are the contact person for CT.gov related issues and selected list of resources for you. So if you have any question, please let us know, email us. Thank you. I'm gonna turn over to Josh.
Thank you, Eriko, and we will wait for some questions to come in while we transition presentations. Just give us one moment. If you do have a question, please feel free to put your question into the chat. Okay, you should all be seeing the slide deck that Jasmine will shortly be presenting. Just give a couple more seconds because you are on a delay. Okay, So just a couple quick announcements before I turn it over to Jasmine. We are going to be talking today about exempt studies, and I'm very excited for Jasmine to be presenting that to all of you. As always, just a couple of quick reminders about these Teams live meetings. If you have any questions, please type them in the question and answer box. Because it's a Teams live meeting, you can't unmute yourself or share your video. It's the only way for you to interact with us, but we do encourage you to ask questions. The slides will be sent after this session is over via the listserv, and the video is also immediately available if you click on the same link that you clicked on to get into this meeting. We will be posting it to the website as soon as we can get a closed captioning file for the video and then linking it on YouTube. We will be sending attendance certificates to any of those who are logged in with a valid email address. Essentially, that just means that you've signed in and joined through Teams. If you've signed in anonymously, we cannot send you an attendance certificate up front, but if you do need one, email hrpp@utsouthwestern.edu, and we'd be happy to get you a certificate. Just a quick plug about that email that will be going out later today with the slides. That does include the evaluation for Research Matters. And we do encourage as many people as possible to fill that out for us. We'll be evaluating those that feedback very soon as we start to plan out the next year of Research Matters presentations. So if you do have any suggestions on content, we highly suggest that you provide that feedback in the REDCap form that's sent out with the slides. Another quick reminder, we sent out a listserv a couple weeks ago about our Research Community Forum. It is a virtual conference, and we are happy to announce that we do have up to 8 hours of CIP credits available. We are still working with Children's on getting CNEs, which are credits for nurses, and hope to have some updated information about that in the coming weeks. If you are ACRP or SOCRA certified, a CCRP or CCRC, I believe that you can claim the CIP credits as part of your ongoing education. When we send this slide deck out, this will be a clickable picture so that you can go directly to the registration page and take a look at the agenda and find out additional information about this conference. But we encourage everybody to check it out, and if you feel so inclined, to go ahead and register for it. And then just one quick reminder before we get into the exempt information. When you are submitting a modification, make sure that you're attaching modified documents or new documents only in the modification smart form. Don't put any new documents or modified documents into what we call the parent smart form, because those don't necessarily pop up to us as new documents or modified documents. Everything that we are reviewing is specifically in that modification smart form. We only want you to make changes to text questions or things like radio boxes or radio buttons to make those changes in the parent smart form, but don't make any other changes, especially with attachments in the parent. Only make those changes in the modification smart form. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Jasmine to talk about exempt studies.
Good afternoon. I'm Jasmine Armstrong. I am one of the senior regulatory analysts in the HRPP office, and today I will be discussing exempt studies as outlined in the 2018 Common Rule. So the objectives of today's session will be to define exempt research. We'll go through each of the 8 categories of exempt research. We'll play a game I like to call Exempt or Not, where we'll go through some real life examples of submissions that have come in as exempt and whether they meet that criteria or not. We'll discuss a few frequently asked questions, and then at the end, we'll go over any questions that may elicit discussion or that haven't been answered during the course of my presentation. So, what exactly is exempt research? Simply put, it's a category of human subjects research, and it is in fact the most minimal risk of the human subjects research types. Study procedures have to meet certain criteria for exemption, and the term exempt really means that it's exempt from most of the requirements that are outlined at 45 CFR 46, which is the Code of Federal Regulations for Human Subjects Research. And exempt research is not subject to continuing review. While the federal regulations don't necessarily dictate this, at UTSW, the IRB must make the determination that your study is exempt. So now we're going to go through each of the exempt categories, starting with Category 1. And this is research that's conducted in established or commonly accepted educational settings that involves normal educational practices. It's important to note that under this category, the procedures that you're carrying on can't adversely impact students' opportunity to learn the required educational content, and it can't affect the assessment of educators who are providing the instructions. So things in this category include research on regular and special education instructional strategies, or research on the effectiveness of instructional techniques, curricula, or classroom management methods. So a few examples that you might see under Category 1 would be CPR training of fellows to evaluate the retention of knowledge using one of two established practices. So perhaps there is a hands-on practice and a simulation practice that's normally used to teach fellows CPR training. An investigator may want to evaluate which of one of these leads to long-term retention of knowledge, and that would be perfectly acceptable under exempt Category 1. Another example would be comparing driver's education curricula offered by local driving schools in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. The researcher would simply observe the classes, compare their driving scores at the end of the test, and evaluate which ones seem to be most efficient based on those driving scores. And another example could be research in a high school evaluating the effectiveness of a new group learning strategy. Things that are not exempt Category 1 would be heart monitoring of students in a gym class to discover abnormalities, or research in a primary school looking at lunch behavior and diet in children with food allergies. It's important to remember, just because the research happens in the school doesn't mean that it qualifies under exempt Category 1. It's got to be focused on a comparison of educational practices or curricula. In this case, we're adding some type of biomedical aspect to the research, and so it doesn't qualify as the evaluation of that educational part that exempt Category 1 requires. Exempt Category 2 is another one that involves educational tests, but it also includes survey procedures, interview procedures, observation of public behavior, but there are certain criteria that have to be met for it to qualify under the exempt category. So either the information has to be recorded in a way that subjects can't be identified. Subjects can be identified, but it doesn't contain any sensitive information. Or if the investigator would like to identify subjects and obtain sensitive information, the IRB has to conduct a limited IRB review, and this is a new concept in the 2018 Common Rule, which is simply to determine that there's adequate provisions to protect the privacy of subjects and to maintain the confidentiality of the data. Survey and interview procedures cannot involve children. However, observations of public behavior are allowable with children, and it can include interventions in addition to these other procedures outlined. So we'll go through some exempt and not exempt category examples under this category. An example of an exempt study would be an observation of children playing in a public park. An investigator may just observe how the children play. They'll note the race, sex, and amount of time the children spend in the park, but they don't interact with the children. That's perfectly acceptable under exempt Category 2. Another example could be a focus group with expectant mothers regarding their perceptions on crib and bassinet designs. So survey procedures with the adult mothers and focus groups would qualify under this example. Some examples that are not Category 2 would be surveys of children about their video game habits. Under exempt Category 2, children cannot be surveyed. And randomly assigning a college student to drink a caffeinated drink or not before they take an educational test. While educational tests and evaluation of these are allowable under exempt Category 2, because you've tossed in this intervention of the caffeinated drink or not, that precludes it from being involved under this exempt category. Exempt Category 3 is a pretty cool one in my opinion. It's research that involves benign behavioral interventions of adults only. Under this category, potential participants have to agree beforehand to the intervention and the information collected, and one of the following 3 criteria have to be met. It's very similar to the criteria that have to be met in exempt Category 2. So either the investigator is recording information in a way where subjects can be identified, so you don't have a master list there. The information can identify subjects, but it doesn't contain sensitive information. Or if you're identifying subjects and collecting sensitive information, the IRB once again conducts a limited review. So we've learned this new term, benign behavioral intervention, but what exactly is it in practice? So under this category, the intervention has to be brief in duration, so maybe minutes, no longer than a few hours. It's got to be harmless, painless, not physically invasive, not likely to have a significant adverse lasting impact on the subjects, and this could be physically or psychologically, emotionally, no long lasting impact on the subjects, and the investigator shouldn't have a reason to think that subjects would find the interventions offensive or embarrassing. And it can include non-behavioral interventions, so biomedical interventions are not allowed under this exempt category. However, deception is acceptable if and only if the subject agrees to participate after they've been informed that they will be misled or unaware regarding the true nature or purpose of the research. And while not required, a debrief explaining the true purpose of the research after the intervention is strongly encouraged. So exempt Category 3 examples. One would be having subjects solve puzzles under low, medium, and high noise conditions to see how quickly or how accurately they solve these puzzles under the different noise conditions. Some not examples would be being randomized to take Tylenol versus Advil, using a Fitbit, or interventions that last days, weeks, or months, because that doesn't meet that brief in duration criteria that is specifically outlined in the regulations. So we've discussed a limited IRB review that's for certain categories in 2 and 3, where you're identifying individuals, you're collecting sensitive information. So this is a new requirement for these categories under the 2018 Common Rule. And as part of the limited review, the IRB has to determine that there's an appropriate and adequate plan in place to protect the privacy of subjects and to maintain the confidentiality of data. So it's similar to, we'll ask you to provide some sort of data safety plan if you are anticipating your study will qualify under exempt categories 2 or 3I. And depending on the nature of the information that's obtained in the study, a certificate of confidentiality might be required before the investigator is allowed to begin the research procedures. So the next one, exempt Category 4, is what I think we see a bit more often, and what some would have seen previously under the pre-2018 Common Rule as expedited Category 5. So exempt Category 4 involves secondary research for which consent is not required under the following 4 criteria. Either the identifiable private information or biospecimens are publicly available. The information, including biospecimens, is recorded in such a way that you can't readily identify the subject, so there's no master list. The investigator doesn't contact the subjects or try to re-identify the subjects. Under the third criteria, the secondary research is regulated by HIPAA. So this could be identifiable information with a master list. But under category 4.3i, it does not include identifiable bias specimens. This is data regulated by HIPAA only. And under exempt category 4.4, the secondary research activity is conducted by or on behalf of a federal entity, and it involves the use of federally generated non-research information. Once again, this does not include biospecimens. So exempt category 4.1 and 4.2i can include biospecimens, but 3i and 4 do not include biospecimens. So exempt category 4 allows investigators to use identifiable information that's been collected for some other activity, whether this is data and specimens collected as part of clinical care or that was collected as part of prior research. It does not allow for any collections of the primary collections of information or biospecimens. So the investigator cannot collect new information as part of their research. This can't include surveys. It can include blood draws, buccal swabs, or other types of biospecimens. But it does allow for investigators to obtain information or specimens that are both retrospective and prospectively obtained for some other purpose other than their research project. And only research for which consent is not required will qualify under exempt category 4. So this is a little bit new with the 2018 Common Rule. And the rationale behind this is that there are certain HIPAA provisions that allow investigators to record and retain identifiable private information, but not biospecimens. So HIPAA doesn't cover the recording and retaining identifiable biospecimen information. HIPAA also provides protections in the research context for the data that would be collected under this exempt category. So even though consent isn't required, depending on how the investigator will be interacting or not interacting with the potential participants, HIPAA authorization may still be required. And let's remember that HIPAA does not apply to data when health information is not included in the data set. So if HIPAA doesn't apply to the data, then it will not qualify for exemption under this category. An example where HIPAA would not apply, it would be if your research was somehow related only to the collection of a surgeon's name and specialty, or if you were just collecting information on parental incomes or occupations, those sorts of demographics that don't include any health information, it would not be eligible for exempt under this category. Exempt category 5 is something I haven't seen too often, but the federal regulations do allow it. So it's research and projects that are conducted or supported by the federal department or agency that is meant to study, evaluate, improve, or examine public benefit or service programs. Some of these projects can include internal studies by federal employees, and studies under contracts or consulting agreements, cooperative agreements, or grants with the federal entities. One caveat to this category is that the research has to be published on a publicly accessible federal website or in some other manner as dictated by the department or agency head prior to the research beginning. Exempt category 6 is one I haven't seen too often, but I think it's pretty cool as well, is its taste and food quality evaluation and consumer acceptance studies. So there are two criteria under which a research project may qualify for exempt under category 6. The first would be if it's wholesome foods without any additives are consumed and you're evaluating the taste or consumer acceptance of those products. Or if a food is consumed and it contains a food ingredient, an agricultural chemical, or an environmental contaminant at or below the level that's found to be safe, and you're evaluating consumer acceptance or taste and food quality, it would also qualify as exempt category under Category 6. So exempt Category 7 and 8 kind of go hand in hand, so I'll talk about them a little bit quickly, and I may reference one in the other. But exempt Category 7 is the storage or maintenance for secondary research for which broad consent is required. I know I haven't defined broad consent for you now. I'll do it in like 2 slides, so just trust me that broad consent is a thing that happens, and it has to be obtained in order for the study to qualify under exempt Category 7. So there are some criteria that must be met in order for your research to qualify under exempt Category 7. So it's specifically obtaining private information and identifiable biospecimens for secondary research if the IRB conducts a limited IRB review and determines the following: that broad consent was obtained in accordance with the regulations outlined at 45 CFR 46. Broad consent was either appropriately documented or a waiver of documentation of this consent was appropriate. When or if there is a change made for research purposes in the way the information is stored, there has to be an adequate plan to protect the privacy of subjects and to maintain the confidentiality of data. And if some or all of the subjects are vulnerable to coercion or undue influence, such as children, prisoners, those with impaired decision-making capacity, or individuals who may be economically or educationally disadvantaged, then there are additional safeguards in place to protect the rights and welfare of these subjects. Exempt Category 8 is it's tied closely in with Category 7. So Category 7 is the storage and maintaining of this identifiable information. However, Category 8 is the actual use of the information that was stored under a study approved by Category 7. So this is secondary research for which broad consent is required, and that broad consent element differentiates it from research you may see under exempt Category 4 or expedited Category 5. So the first 3 criteria are exactly the same. The IRB still has to do this limited IRB review to ensure that broad consent is obtained in accordance with regulations. Either documentation was appropriately obtained or there is a waiver of this documentation. And the IRB has to do an additional step to ensure that the research proposed under Category 8 is conducted within the scope of the broad consent that was obtained under Category 7. And the investigator doesn't plan to include returning individual research results to subjects as part of the study plan. Notable here is that this caveat under IV here 4 doesn't prevent an investigator from following any legal requirements to return individual research results. So I've said broad consent quite a lot in the past 4 minutes. Now we'll talk about it a little bit to actually describe what broad consent is. So broad consent is consent that's obtained for the collection, maintenance, and storage of identifiable data and specimens specifically for future research. So it's a consent that you would enroll individuals into this large project specifically for future research, and presumably this could make more research qualify as exempt under Category 7 and 8. However, due to logistics and just kind of the difficulties with tracking that can occur at a large academic and medical institution, UTSW has not implemented broad consent institution-wide, and at its discretion can limit or constrain the use of broad consent as appropriate. If you're an investigator and you intend to receive information or data from a site where they have implemented broad consent, or you just feel very strongly about a particular project where you would like to implement broad consent, I would strongly recommend reaching out to the HRPP office, and we can discuss this on a case-by-case basis, since this isn't a thing that we've implemented institution-wide. but do recognize that some other institutions may have this implemented, and they may have some very valuable information that investigators here would like to use. Now it's my favorite part of the presentation. We're going to play exempt or not. So we'll give you the example. You get 2 or 3 seconds to think it over, and then we'll give you the answer. So the first example, an investigator reviews medical records. The data is retrospective and prospective. Subject data will be linked to identifiable information through a master list, and only information about UTSW patients will be collected. So is this exempt or not? And if we go to the answer, yes. So the revised common rule allows for the review of retrospective and prospective data under exempt categories as long as it was collected for some other primary purpose. And a master list is also allowed for the use of data if HIPAA applies under category 4.3i of the exempt category. So 10 points to Slytherin if you got the category right for this one. Our next example. The study involves a survey interviewing subjects about their marijuana usage. All subjects are adults. The investigator will maintain a master list as surveys will be administered 2 and 3 months after enrollment in the study. The procedures are limited to surveys, and the subjects are not prescribed any drugs in the study. So exempt or not? And we'll just answer that with a resounding yes. So provided that the IRB conducts a limited IRB review under category 2.3i, the investigator can obtain identifiable information about sensitive topics. Likely in this situation, since marijuana use, recreational or otherwise, is not legal in the state of Texas, the IRB here would likely require a certificate of confidentiality to further protect the subjects enrolled in this study. And our last example in exempt or not will be this one. So subjects are enrolled in a study to evaluate how well a texting intervention helps them make healthy fitness decisions. All subjects are adults. They'll receive 3 text messages a week, including messages such as, take 15 minutes for a short walk, and try to aim for 10,000 steps a day. The subjects receive text messages for 3 months, and they'll complete questionnaires before and after the 3 months of text messaging. Would this qualify as exempt? And the answer to this one is no. So while the surveys would definitely qualify for exemption, the surveys of adults would qualify for the exemption under category 2, and texting is indeed a benign behavioral intervention. We're texting people 3 times a week over 3 months, and in order to qualify for the benign behavioral intervention or category 3, the intervention has to be brief. So because of the duration of the study, it would not qualify under exempt category 2 and 3, and expedited review would be required for this particular study. So we'll talk about a few frequently asked questions that I've just come across in my experience since we've switched to the 2018 Common Rule. Can exempt categories be combined? Yes. All the procedures must separately meet the criteria and they can't conflict. So an example of an exempt combination would be a medical record review and survey of adults. So the survey of adults would be approved under category 2, and the medical record review would be able to be approved under category 4. Even though we would likely ask for a consent plan because you're likely interacting with these individuals to provide them the survey, the review of medical records considered separately would not require consent and would therefore still meet the criteria outlined under category 4, so we could approve the study as a whole as an exempt study. What documents do I need to submit? So as applicable, the following documents should be submitted to support your ERB application. Any questionnaires, interviews, surveys, a list of data elements for medical and research record review, if a limited IRB review will be conducted, so that's under those categories 2 and 3 when you're collecting identifiable sensitive information, you'll want to provide a plan for protecting the privacy and maintaining the confidentiality of the data. Consent forms or information sheets should be submitted when you're interacting with your subjects. And a HIPAA authorization or a request for a waiver or alteration should be submitted if you're collecting health information as part of your project. And I think this is my favorite one. Do I have to submit modifications? Even though you don't have to submit a continuing review, you do have to submit a modification. So any changes to the research should be reviewed by the IRB before you implement these changes, unless you're making this change to eliminate an immediate harm to the subject. In that case, eliminate the immediate harm and let us know within 5 days after you've done such that there's been this change. The IRB will then determine if the changes alter the exempt determination. So let's say previously you were only surveying adults and in a study and it qualified under exempt category 2, but now you think it'd be really helpful to have some information between older adolescents age 16 and older. When you submit that modification, at that point, it would no longer qualify for exempt under category 2 because you're enrolling minors. And because there is going to be some change to the exempt status, the reviewer for that study will contact the PI and will help you come up with a plan to modify the study in ERB so we can approve this, reevaluate the status of this study because it would likely be expedited at this point. But we will always reach out and let you know if there's any changes that will need to be had. And at this point, that sums up my presentation. And I will turn it back over to Josh for any questions.
Thank you, Jasmine. I think I can speak for everybody, and that was a very informative presentation. I believe that so far all questions that we've received have been answered and published. I'm not sure that we've gotten any specific for Jasmine. We'll just give a couple of seconds to see if any questions come in. And I'm not seeing any questions pop up. I'm not seeing that anybody's typing anything. So, of course, you can always ask questions after this presentation is ended. Just shoot your questions to hrpp@utsouthwestern.edu, and we'd be happy to get back to you. I do see a question that just popped up. So the question is, for a protocol that requires a retrospective count of total patients per week over a defined time frame and no PHI collected to determine the percent of patients that met criteria for another study, would this classify as exempt category 4? Sorry, so that's just really long, so let me sort of digest that again. So we have a protocol that is going to ask for a total count of patients per week over a defined time frame with no identifiable information collected. So I think the answer to this question is a little bit of it depends. If you're looking to just get the total count of patients sort of as a preparatory to research activity, it's not necessarily going to count as exempt category 4, but I think we'd sort of have to get to the crux of why are we looking at this data? What's the question that you're looking to answer? And how are you getting the data? If you're getting the data in a manner in which you're not actually going into the medical records and you're not seeing any identifiable data, that's one thing. It's one thing for the study to say that no PHI or identifiable information is going to be collected, but if the data is going to be used in that you're looking at the medical record, then that would certainly require prospective approval. So for whoever asked this question, if this is for a specific study, I would highly encourage you to sort of follow up with us and we can get an answer to your question specifically. And with that, I'm just going to go ahead and end the slideshow. Of course, again, if you have any questions, please follow up with us. If you can, please provide a response in the evaluation that'll be sent out later today, and check out the registration site for the Research Community Forum. Thank you all so much and enjoy the rest of your April.